cast you out before you even knew the rules of their game, branded you the black sheep, not because you lacked potential, but because you threatened structure. You asked questions when they needed silence. You saw through performance when they needed blind belief. You refused to wear their mask, so they painted you a villain. Their discomfort needed a scapegoat, and you, with your fire just beneath the skin, were the perfect target. But what they never predicted, what they never wanted to consider, was that the one they exiled would return unrecognizable, not an apology, in evolution. You didn't come back to blend in. You came back to replace the narrative. You didn't flip the script. You burned it. Legends don't walk out of comfort. They are dragged through ridicule, through exile, through mockery wrapped in concern. They handed you shame like inheritance, expected you to wear it as identity. And for a while you did. You thought maybe they were right. Maybe you were broken. Maybe your instincts were defects. But then something snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly. A fracture that healed differently. You stopped seeking return. You stopped trying to convince the crowd that you were worth a second glance. And in that silence, you met your edge, the raw part of you they tried to shame into silence, the version they never imagined would stand. And once you met it, everything changed. You weren't looking for redemption anymore. You were becoming a reason for others to wake up. You weren't lost. You were being forged. That's what they missed. The black sheep isn't broken. It's building. While they stood in circles of false harmony, you wandered through storm after storm until you realized the lightning didn't destroy you, it charged you. You fed off of the very thing they thought would ruin you. Rejection became revelation. Isolation became intelligence. They whispered that you were strange, difficult, unstable, but what they were really saying was uncontrollable. And they were right. You don't follow herds. You unmake them. You don't walk behind shepherds. You question why the flock obeys so blindly. That's what makes you legend. Not your resilience, but your refusal to reduce yourself to survivorship alone. Now they watch, silently, nervously. The ones who laughed at your silence now mimic your voice. The ones who discredited your ideas now recycle them as their own. They watch because you've become a living contradiction to every lie they told about you. You weren't crazy, you were correct. You weren't dramatic, you were discerning. You weren't lost, you were learning. They mistook your mess for a collapse, but chaos is what reality looks like when it's being rearranged. You became the storm, and now every step you take sends tremors through foundations built on fragile egos. There is a psychology to transformation that most can't stomach. The journey from exile to excellence demands you make peace with being misunderstood, not once, constantly. You trained yourself to walk without applause, to speak truth even when your voice shook, to find strength in the quiet rather than the crowd. That mental discipline? That's what separates the remembered from the recycled. You became unshakable because you stopped needing confirmation, and when you stopped needing them, they lost control. Now they don't know whether to cheer or retreat, because they know your existence exposes their avoidance. You're not just succeeding, you're shattering. Every label they stitched to your name you wore until it chafed, then you ripped it off in front of them. You were the experiment they ran in secret, the one they hoped would fail so they could feel safe in their smallness. But you didn't. You evolved in silence. You taught yourself a new language, one they don't speak. And now when you walk into the room, it's not for acceptance, it's to evaluate. They can't handle that. They can't look you in the eye without remembering how loudly they doubted you. Your presence is a reminder. They never had the final word. You didn't become a legend because you sought vengeance. You became a legend because you refused to collapse. There were days you sat in darkness so thick it felt like breath wouldn't return. Nights where doubt felt louder than faith. But you stayed. You outlasted every version of yourself that wanted to disappear. That's power, not in the applause, not in the image, but in the integrity of continuation. You became legend, not by rising, but by refusing to stay buried. And now, every step you take is a line being rewritten in the book they tried to close on your name. And make no mistake, they are watching. Even if their mouths stay shut, their eyes are wide open. Legends make people uncomfortable because they force confrontation. They force those still stuck in denial to reckon with what potential looks like when it stops asking for permission. You didn't just come back, you came back with a blueprint, with scars turned into strategy, with silence that speaks louder than any argument. You didn't rise to prove them wrong. You rose because staying low was never your design. You were just building in a direction they couldn't see. This isn't your peak, this is your entry. You've stepped into the space you were always meant to dominate. The difference now is that you bring with you the weight of everything they ignored. Every sleepless night, every invisible win, every rejected truth. You are legend not because you boast, but because you show. Without needing to convince, without needing to embellish, the black sheep didn't become a leader. The black sheep became undeniable. You weren't accepted, you were recognized. And that, right there, is the part they'll never recover from. You didn't ask for the spotlight, you walked past it, and still, it followed. You never needed to shout. You never needed to claw your way into the room like a beggar fighting for scraps. You moved differently. You chose poise over posturing, precision over performance. While they played the optics game, selling curated versions of themselves to anyone who would bite, you walked through fire without an audience. Every decision you made in silence became a signature, invisible but unforgettable. That's what integrity does. It etches your name into the fabric of time in ways ego never could. And now, the world whispers your name before you arrive. Doors crack open, not because you forced them, but because somewhere, someone remembered how you stood firm when it would have been easier to fold. They recall how you kept your hands clean when blood was fashionable. You don't storm rooms anymore. The rooms adjust themselves when they hear you're near. The ones who tried to erase you now listen for your name in meetings they once told you you'd never be invited to. They recognize your echo, not because you advertised it, but because integrity leaves residue. It lingers, it haunts. Every time you told the truth when it would have been more profitable to lie, you carved a path that they now call fate. But fate had nothing to do with it. That was your discipline, your restraint, your brutal self-respect. And while they were building empires on loopholes and loophole people, you were building something harder, slower, deeper. Respect with a long memory. They can't fake what you carry. That's why they whisper. That's why they pause. Because the game changed when someone like you chose ethics over ego and still ended up ahead. Integrity terrifies those who are used to shortcuts. It moves with a kind of elegance they can't mimic because it requires consistency. And they know, deep down, you didn't just make better choices. You became someone they can't duplicate. Not with money, not with strategy, not even with power. Because power without foundation crumbles. You didn't skip the lessons. You stayed in the fire long enough to become the heat, and now, even in spaces you've never set foot in, your reputation arrives like a storm before the weather shifts. They speak your name not to praise you, but to prepare. You represent something they can't spin, a living standard, and people remember standards. There are rooms that would have never entertained your presence before, rooms where your face wasn't known, your background wasn't respected, your value wasn't visible. But the world shifted when you chose to remain untouched, in a time where everyone sells a piece of themselves for relevance. Integrity made you magnetic, not loud, just inevitable. Now, the gatekeepers listen for your cadence in the mouths of others. They hear your stories retold in the context of resilience, of courage, of clean power. You're the example whispered across tables. That one, the one who never compromised. They remember. Even those who never met you feel the tremor of your decisions. Your silence speaks. Your absence rearranges expectations. You don't need introductions anymore. You became your own reference. The mention of your name makes rooms tense, not because they fear you, but because they respect what you represent. In a world where deception is rewarded, your honesty became a disturbance. It forced people to measure themselves differently, to rethink how they climb. You were the disruption, not in action, but in being. And now that you've made your way into those spaces without selling out, they want to study you, but you can't be reverse engineered. Integrity isn't a strategy, it's a soul in motion. You built something that can't be bought, trust that travels faster than reputation. And when you walk into those rooms, you don't ask for a seat, you bring one. Your presence rewrites the temperature. People stand a little straighter, speak a little clearer, because you are proof that it's possible to rise without betrayal, to succeed without submission. And that kind of proof, it's contagious. You became the standard that makes them uncomfortable. The legend they didn't endorse but now can't deny. And they talk. They always do. But it's different now. Before they whispered your flaws. Now they whisper your discipline, your distance, your clarity. You became the blueprint, not because you were better, but because you were unshakable. Your name has become a trigger, not of fear, but of reckoning. It walks into spaces before you do and speaks truths that others avoid. You don't need to brag, the work has spoken. The quiet loyalty of people you helped in private has turned into loud opportunities in places you didn't campaign for. That's the reward of integrity, compounding returns in the currency of respect. You were never chasing them, you were building something they didn't know how to measure. Now they scramble to redefine value because you changed what it looks like. You made clean power seductive again. And the ones who sold out for speed now envy your endurance. You don't knock anymore. The doors open because someone inside remembers a time you stayed honest when everything incentivized the opposite. Your integrity is a reputation that doesn't need a PR team. It breathes, it circulates, it infiltrates. And now, the world doesn't just see you, it follows you. People are listening not because of your noise, but because of your consistency. The ones who laughed at your silence now study your strategy. They ask each other what your next move is. They try to predict you, not knowing that your greatest weapon was never surprise, it was principle. And that's what makes you terrifying to the dishonest. You don't speak their language. You can't be swayed by their incentives. You've already walked through their version of success and walked past it. They threw everything at you, and you didn't break. You ascended, not quickly, not conveniently, but completely. You didn't just survive the system, you became its correction. That's why they whisper, and that's why they hesitate. Because every time you move with integrity, you force the world to ask itself, what does it mean to win? And suddenly, all their noise feels smaller. You didn't play louder, you played longer.